In a time in ancient history, when kingdoms were still young, two great armies stood facing each other. The Israelites, under the command of King Saul, were camped on one hill. On the other side of the valley, on a hill opposite, stood the Philistine army with their formidable, bloodthirsty warriors. They stood in silent deadlock, each waiting for the other's move, and between them lay a narrow valley where fear and challenge became tangible. This stalemate lasted for many days, and each morning a giant figure would step out from the Philistine ranks. His name was Goliath, from Gath, a giant more than 9 feet tall. He was an extraordinary warrior, with a helmet of bronze on his head and a scale armor of bronze weighing more than 125 pounds. His legs were also clad in bronze, and a bronze javelin was slung across his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and its iron point weighed more than 15 pounds. A shield-bearer went before him, but it was he, with his immense size and powerful voice, who was the real threat. Each day, Goliath would stand in the middle of the valley and challenge the Israelite army, his voice echoing across the hills. "Why have you come out to draw up for battle?" he would roar. "I am a Philistine, and you are servants of Saul. Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants." When they heard his challenge, the entire Israelite army was terrified and greatly afraid. They were brave warriors, but before Goliath, their courage had evaporated. They cowered in their camp, not one man daring to accept the challenge. 38 days had passed, and despair had begun to gnaw at their spirits. King Saul, once a formidable leader, now watched the valley in helpless frustration. Meanwhile, far from the battlefield, on the hills of Bethlehem, a young boy was tending his father's flock. His name was David, the youngest son of Jesse. David had no appearance of a warrior. He had a brave heart, but his strength came not from sword or armor, but from a simple slingshot and an unshakable faith. He spent his days leading his flock through the green slopes, singing songs of praise to God and protecting his sheep from lions and bears. For David, the world consisted only of the hills, the sheep, and the presence of the Creator. One day, his father, Jesse, called him. David's 3 older brothers, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, were in Saul's army. Jesse told David to take an ephah of roasted grain and 10 loaves of bread to his brothers, along with 10 cheeses for their commander. David obeyed, rising early the next morning, leaving the flock with another keeper, and setting out. To David, this was not a mission of war, but an act of familial love. He had no idea that this journey would change the fate of an entire nation. When David arrived at the army camp, he found the soldiers preparing for battle. He ran to greet his brothers and asked how they were. It was at that very moment that Goliath again stepped out. Just as he had done for 38 days, he stood in the middle of the valley and roared his familiar challenge, a humiliating insult to the army of Israel. The entire Israelite army heard his voice, and once again, they were terrified and fled. David did not understand. He turned to a soldier and asked, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" David had heard enough. Though he was but a boy, his heart burned with indignation for the honor of the Lord. He saw what the warriors had missed. They only saw a man-sized giant, while he saw an arrogant fool who dared to challenge the power of the Almighty. David's words reached the soldiers, and soon they reached the ears of King Saul. David was summoned before the king. When Saul saw David, he saw only a boy, a young man with a ruddy face and a simple appearance, not a warrior. "You are not able to go against this Philistine," Saul said, "for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." David understood the king's fear, but he replied with absolute conviction. "When I was keeping my father's sheep," David recounted, "when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." David's steadfastness and faith astonished Saul. The king could not refuse his courage. Saul reluctantly agreed, saying, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Then Saul had David put on his own armor, a helmet of bronze on his head, and gave him his own sword. But David tried to walk in them and found them too cumbersome, too unwieldy. The weapons of the world were not meant for him. "I cannot go with these," David said, "for I have not tested them." David took them all off, leaving behind the armor, the sword, and the shield of a warrior he was never meant to be. Instead, he took his shepherd's staff. He went down to a shallow brook in the valley, where the water had receded and smooth, round stones lay. He bent down, chose 5 smooth stones, and placed them in his shepherd's bag. With his slingshot in his hand, David walked into the valley. He moved without haste, but his steps were filled with confident purpose. From the other side, Goliath saw the boy approaching. He laughed derisively, his laughter echoing across the valley. "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" Goliath roared. He cursed David by the names of his gods. He said, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." But David, with a face devoid of fear, replied calmly but powerfully, "You come to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." David continued, his voice full of conviction. "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." With those declarations, David ran toward Goliath. He reached into his bag, took out a stone, and placed it in his slingshot. Goliath began to move toward David, but he was still a good distance away. David whirled his slingshot, and with an incredible precision, he let the stone fly. The stone flew through the air, making a small whistling sound. It flew straight and true, and it struck Goliath squarely on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead. Goliath staggered, and then, with an earth-shaking crash, he fell face down on the ground. Standing over Goliath, David still had no sword of his own. He ran to the giant, pulled out Goliath's sword, and used that very sword to cut off his head. Then David held up Goliath's head for all the Philistine army to see. panic filled their ranks. They turned and fled in a wild, chaotic retreat. When the Israelite army saw their enemy running, their fear turned into a renewed courage. They shouted in triumph and pursued the Philistines, defeating them decisively. And so, a young shepherd boy had saved an entire nation. The victory did not belong to the strongest, the best equipped, or the most experienced. The victory belonged to the one with the most unwavering faith, the one who knew that the battle was not his to fight, but God's. The story of David and Goliath is not merely a legend of a battle, but a timeless reminder that true courage comes not from size or strength, but from absolute trust in a higher power. David, the shepherd boy, would go on to become the king of Israel. But on that day, in that valley, he stood as a king of courage. He showed the world that a person of faith could accomplish what the greatest of warriors could not.